A rookie trucker swaggers into a crowded truck stop, jeers at a dented old truck, then goes silent when the license plate reads Iron SGT. Who owns that battered beast? And why does one metal tag shake his confidence to the core? Let's roll and find out. The sun was still stretching across the Colorado sky when David Merced pulled into Jackson Pass truck stop like he owned the place. His brand new Freightliner Cascadia gleamed like a trophy, its chrome grille shining, its spotless white paint catching the light with every slow, deliberate turn. The air brakes hissed, and David stepped out with the kind of swagger only a 22-year-old fresh out of driving school could manage. He wore sunglasses even though it wasn't that bright, and his ball cap, backward of course, boasted the logo of a high-end trucking academy. Behind him, two fellow rookie drivers followed his lead, clearly part of the same graduating class, each trying to imitate David's confidence but falling short. "Look at that piece of junk," David said, laughing loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. He gestured toward a truck parked at the far end of the lot. It looked like it hadn't seen a proper wash in a decade. The paint was peeling, the fenders were rusted, and the muffler rattled with a distinct wheeze. Its faded green cab sat low, worn by time, distance, and who knew how many miles. "Must have rolled straight out of 1972, David smirked, nudging one of his buddies. "I didn't even know they still let dinosaurs on the road." His friends chuckled nervously. A few older truckers glanced over from their coffee and egg sandwiches. Most just shook their heads. David strutted closer, maybe to grab a selfie with the relic. That's when he saw the license plate. Black letters stamped into a white background, weathered by years on the road. Iron SGT. The laughter stopped. David squinted, his grin fading. Curious, he stepped around to the driver's side door and froze again. Affixed beneath the side window were 3 stickers: a faded Purple Heart, a 1st Cavalry Division patch, and a vinyl emblem of a POW MIA flag. Taped to the inside of the windshield was an old photo, a pair of young soldiers in full combat gear, arms slung over each other's shoulders. Before David could take another breath, the driver's door creaked open. Out stepped Samuel Maddox, known to the few who remembered as Iron Maddox. He moved slow but deliberate, like every motion still carried military precision. 74, with silver-gray hair tied into a short ponytail under a ball cap that read Vietnam Vet. He wore a button-down work shirt, jeans, and boots scuffed by thousands of highway miles. His left leg moved stiffly, a limp David hadn't noticed until now. Samuel said nothing. He just looked at David. No anger or pity, just stillness. The kind of stillness that could silence an engine. David opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to backpedal, but nothing came out. He looked again at the license plate and then at the truck, not as a joke anymore, but as something sacred. The arrogance he wore like armor cracked. Behind them, a dark blue SUV pulled into the lot. From it stepped Michael Chapman, CEO of Redline Freight Systems. His designer jeans clashed with a leather field jacket bearing a Marine Corps insignia. A man in his early 50s, Michael's posture still hinted at boot camp roots. Tall, squared shoulders, alert eyes. He'd stopped here on a whim en route to a site meeting, but what he witnessed changed the course of his morning. He waited until the moment had passed, then approached slowly. "Young man," he said to David, "you've got power under your hood, no doubt. But there's more horsepower in that man's story than you'll find in any spec sheet." David nodded quietly, still unsure what to say. Michael turned to Samuel and extended a hand. "Sir, Michael Chapman. I run Redline Freight. Ex-Marine myself. Thank you for your service." Samuel took the hand, firm but brief. "Maddox. Samuel." Michael glanced at the rig. "She still runs." Samuel smirked faintly. "Ain't always pretty, but she gets where I need to go." Michael folded his arms. "I'm building a mentorship program. Young drivers paired with experienced ones. Most of the vets I call say they're too tired, too busy, or just done. You're clearly not. What do you say?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I drive alone." "I figured," Michael replied, "but I've got a condition that might make it worth your time." He looked at David. "This one right here could use a month of riding shotgun. Learn what can't be taught in a classroom. David stiffened, but said nothing. Company'll pay for the miles, the training, and hazard bonuses if needed, Michael added. Samuel's eyes flicked to David again, then back to Michael. You think this kid's gonna listen? I think he will by the end, Michael said. Samuel nodded slowly. Then I'll take him. David blinked. Wait, what? I didn't. You're on my payroll now, Michael cut in. If you want to stay there, you ride with him. You don't want to? Turn in your badge and head back to school. David looked from Michael to Samuel and back again. He swallowed hard. When do we leave? Samuel turned and walked back toward the truck. Sun's up in 6 hours. Be here or don't. David stood there a long moment, staring at the iron sergeant as the veteran climbed into his old rig, started the engine, and disappeared into the dusk like a ghost with unfinished business. Tomorrow, David would ride beside him as a student, not of trucking, but of respect. And maybe, if he paid attention, of something even bigger. The next morning, the parking lot at Jackson Pass truck stop was quiet, except for the low rumble of a single idling engine. David Merced stood beside his duffel bag, sleep-deprived and still unsure how he'd ended up here. His spotless rig sat parked in the distance, untouched. Today, he wasn't the driver. He was the passenger. The battered green Peterbilt, its faded decals and rust lines now strangely intimidating, waited with its door open. Samuel Iron Maddox sat behind the wheel, sipping black coffee from an old thermos. He didn't speak, just nodded once toward the passenger seat. David hesitated, then climbed in. The inside of the cab smelled of oil, leather, and something faintly like tobacco. Dog tags hung from the rearview mirror. A folded flag was tucked behind the seat, and a small, worn journal rested on the dashboard beside a neatly rolled American flag bandana. Buckle in, Samuel said simply. They pulled onto the highway just as the sky shifted from purple to gold. The first few hours were painfully quiet. Samuel drove with steady, deliberate movements. No music, no small talk. Every few miles, he'd check the mirrors, scan the gauges, and tap the logbook with a pencil. Notes only he could understand. David, bored and restless, finally asked, Don't you have GPS? Samuel didn't glance over. I have eyes. David huffed and looked out the window, arms crossed. You know, there's easier ways to teach respect. Respect ain't taught, Samuel said. It's earned, mostly by shutting up and paying attention. David fell silent. By midday, they were climbing the steep roads through the Rockies. Snow still lingered on the shaded cliffsides, and gusts of wind hit the cab like ocean waves. As they crossed a narrow pass, Samuel pulled into a scenic overlook. He didn't say why. He just stepped out, walked to the edge of the cliff, and stood there, still as stone. David followed, confused. Samuel opened his worn leather journal and read something quietly, lips moving. He placed a single, crumpled dog tag on the rock and stood for another long minute. What is this? David asked. Samuel answered without turning. His name was Reggie, my brother. A beat passed. He bought this truck when we got back. Only drove it 6 months before the cancer took him. Agent Orange. David looked down at the tag. He didn't speak. Back in the cab, they kept moving, the silence between them changing shape. Less heavy now, more respectful. Later that afternoon, the descent into the western slope of Colorado began. David leaned back, checking his phone, when suddenly Samuel's voice cut in, sharp, urgent. Hold on. The cab jolted. Samuel gripped the wheel hard as they rounded a turn and the brakes gave way. Nothing but air in the line. The rig picked up speed. David sat bolt upright. What the hell? Samuel's eyes flicked across the dashboard. Brake pressure's gone. Lines cut. Cut. Like, someone? Hold on. They were flying now, downhill at over 60, the trailer swaying dangerously with each curve. Samuel shifted into a lower gear, downshifting carefully, easing the trailer's weight with the Jake brake. A long, white-knuckled minute later, he guided the rig onto a runaway truck ramp, soft gravel rising to meet them, and the vehicle finally, mercifully, came to a stop in a storm of dust and screeching metal. The silence afterward was deafening. David stumbled out, heart racing, legs shaking. Samuel calmly set the brake, climbed down, and popped the hood. Underneath, the damage was clear. The rear brake line had been cleanly sliced. Not frayed, not corroded. Cut. Samuel's expression hardened. He walked a few paces away, pulled out an ancient flip phone, and made a call. David couldn't hear much, just low murmurs. Then a phrase stood out. "I told you to keep them off my routes." Samuel ended the call and pocketed the phone. Did someone do this on purpose? David asked. Samuel didn't answer directly. He just handed David a wrench and said, "Start unbolting the rear line. We'll patch it." "You're not calling a tow?" Samuel stared at him. "Toll take 5 hours. We'll be back on the road in 2. Reluctantly, David dropped to his knees and followed instructions. As they worked, grease staining his jeans and knuckles, he caught himself stealing glances at the old man. The way Samuel's hands moved with purpose, the calm under pressure, the lack of panic when they could have both died. "What was that call?" David finally asked. Samuel didn't look up. "Old debts." David frowned. "What kind of debts get your brakes cut?" Samuel paused, eyes focused on the brake line. Then, simply, "The kind that don't forgive." The rest of the repair was quiet. When they finally rolled again, the sunset burned orange over the mountains. David didn't brag anymore. He didn't check his phone. He didn't talk unless Samuel spoke first. And that night, as they parked outside a remote diner and shared a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, David caught himself doing something unfamiliar, listening. Not just to Samuel's stories, but to the weight between them. The pauses, the losses left unsaid. Somewhere between the brake dust and blood pressure meds, David was beginning to understand that a man's worth wasn't in his rig's paint job or his swagger, but in the miles he's endured and the people he's kept alive. And Samuel Maddox endured more than most, and still kept driving. The desert night was quiet, save for the steady hum of the Peterbilt's engine and the occasional thump of tar-stripped pavement under the wheels. They were deep in New Mexico, cutting across a desolate stretch of Highway 60, far from city lights and even farther from cell reception. David watched the stars through the side window, surprised by how clear and endless the sky looked without neon or traffic. Samuel was focused, his jaw clenched slightly, eyes sharp. Something about the way he handled night runs changed him. He grew quieter, more alert, like an old predator in unfamiliar terrain. "You always this tense on night drives?" David asked. Samuel didn't blink. "Only when someone's watching the route." David furrowed his brow. "What does that mean?" Samuel glanced at the mirrors, then back to the road. "We're not alone." David turned in his seat. Sure enough, a pair of headlights had been trailing them for miles, keeping their distance, but never falling too far back. Then came another set, and another. 3 cars now, weaving slightly in the rear view like sharks circling. Samuel muttered, "Too clean. No tags. Rental jobs, maybe." David's voice dropped. "You think they're after you?" Samuel gave a slight nod. "Or what I'm carrying. Or who I used to be." Moments later, it happened. One of the cars surged ahead, pulling beside them. Another swerved into the oncoming lane, edging in toward the truck's front tires. The third rode up behind them, dangerously close, boxed in. Samuel tightened his grip. "They're going for the kill." Suddenly, the car in front slammed its brakes. "Hold on," Samuel shouted. He cranked the wheel, swerving just enough to avoid impact, but the trailer whipped out, skidding violently. David shouted as their cargo, construction machinery, lurched inside the container. In the side mirror, he saw one of the rear cars pull up beside the trailer, 2 men climbing out mid-roll with tools in hand. "They're trying to cut the lock," David shouted. Samuel reached under the seat and pulled out a flare gun, old but ready. He handed it to David. "If they breach the doors, light 'em up. Aim for the tires if you can." David's hands shook as he gripped the flare. Suddenly, Samuel slammed the brakes. Hard. The trailer fishtailed again, forcing the thieves at the back to fall away. One of them tumbled across the gravel shoulder, groaning as the car swerved off into a ditch. Before the others could regroup, Samuel yanked the truck down a narrow service road, unpaved, rocky, and full of sharp twists. The rig bounced violently as they roared into the dark, headlights cutting through scrub brush and dust. Finally, the chasing vehicles gave up, unable to follow the heavy truck through the terrain. They rolled to a stop under a canopy of desert pines, the engine hissing and ticking as it cooled. David jumped out, panting, adrenaline still pumping. "Are you okay?" he asked. But Samuel didn't answer. He was slumped over the wheel, breathing hard. One hand clutched his chest, the other braced on the dash. David rushed around and opened the door. "Samuel!" The old man waved him off weakly, but David wasn't buying it. He climbed up, searching the cab for anything, and that's when he found it. A crushed, half-empty bottle of nitroglycerin pills, tucked into the glove box beside an old leather photo wallet. David's chest tightened. "You've been hiding this?" Samuel didn't answer at first, just sat there, his breath slowly evening out as he popped a pill under his tongue. "It's manageable," he muttered. "That wasn't manageable. You nearly died." "I've nearly died a lot of times. Doesn't mean I stop." David didn't argue, but as they sat in the dark, surrounded by desert silence and shaken dust, a new respect, no, something deeper, began to settle into David's bones. This wasn't just a war hero driving an old rig. This was a man with scars beneath scars, carrying more than just freight, carrying ghosts. Meanwhile, in a sleek boardroom in Phoenix, Michael Chapman stood facing a half-moon table of frowning executives. The logistics firm's senior board was not happy. "You're risking the company's image," one of them said, "putting a relic in charge of training rookies and assigning him a liability like Merced." Michael stayed silent, jaw tight. Another added, "What if something happens on the road? We can't afford lawsuits over some sentimental project." Michael snapped, "This isn't about sentiment. It's about honor." That shut the room up, but only for a second. "Honor doesn't pay premiums, Michael," the CFO said coldly. Michael stepped forward, planting both hands on the table. "You weren't there when Travis bled out in my arms in Fallujah. I couldn't save him, but I can damn well try to save someone now." Samuel's earned that. No one had a response. Michael left the room without waiting for one. Back in the desert, David kept the engine idling as Samuel finally closed his eyes and rested. The old man's breathing was steadier now, but the lines on his face looked deeper in the moonlight. David stared out at the empty road ahead. And for the first time since he started this trip, he wasn't thinking about promotions or pride. He was thinking about how much pain a man could carry and still keep going, and what kind of strength that really took. The Houston run was supposed to be routine, one final haul, 20 hours across state lines, and then the job was done. But nothing about this journey had gone according to plan. David sat behind the wheel at sunrise, the sky painted in streaks of tangerine and steel. Samuel was in the passenger seat, unusually quiet, his color off. They'd fueled up outside El Paso, but the old man hadn't touched his breakfast burrito. His breathing was shallow, his eyes flickering between sleep and something heavier. "You sure about this run?" David asked, hands tightening on the wheel. "You don't look." "Drive," Samuel murmured. "Clock's ticking." David wanted to argue, but didn't. Not yet. They had a high-priority shipment, emergency turbine parts for a refinery, scheduled to arrive before midnight. A missed deadline could trigger millions in penalties. And Samuel lived for this kind of challenge. Even now, with his chest aching and the meds only half working, he wouldn't pull over. But David wasn't that kid from Jackson Pass anymore. An hour out of San Antonio, the CB crackled to life. Static, then a voice, cold, calculated. "Old iron still creaks, huh?" Samuel's eyes snapped open. David leaned forward. "Who the hell is that?" Samuel reached for the mic but stopped short. His hand trembled. "It's him," he muttered. "Who?" Samuel didn't answer. Minutes later, a black SUV pulled up beside the truck. No plates, just like before. This time, it didn't try to run them off the road. It just tailed them, like a shadow reminding them it was there. David's phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Pull off at mile marker 223. Don't ask. Trust me. David glanced at Samuel, whose breathing had grown more ragged by the mile. He gritted his teeth. Cargo or the man? They hit mile 223. David jerked the wheel, veering down a barely marked service road surrounded by sugar pines and heat shimmer. The SUV followed for a moment, then peeled off, tires screeching. Michael was already waiting. He stood beside a rental pickup, sleeves rolled up, his phone still in hand. He looked like he hadn't slept. You were being followed, he said bluntly. Internal leak. One of my own managers is tied to a theft ring. They've been using shipment info to intercept high-value loads. Samuel raised a brow, voice weak. Why me? Michael's face hardened. Because you've got a reputation. You don't fold. And you've seen this game before. David helped Samuel down from the cab. The older man stumbled slightly, his strength was fading fast. We need to get him to a hospital, David said, urgency rising in his voice. But Samuel gripped his arm. No, we finish the haul. We finish it. Michael looked between them. He's not going to make it another 3 hours. I'll drive, David said, stepping forward. You clear the road. Whatever strings you need to pull, pull them. Michael nodded. They split the cab. Samuel stretched across the passenger seat with a cold bottle pressed to his forehead, while David took the wheel, a fire now burning in his gut. He was no longer a rookie chasing his reflection in chrome. He was driving for the man beside him, for every mile of quiet honor Samuel had lived. They made it to Houston with minutes to spare. On the tarmac behind the refinery, the delivery team unloaded the cargo as emergency responders checked Samuel's vitals. He waved them off with a raspy laugh, still refusing to sit in a stretcher. But eventually he let them take him. Before they closed the ambulance doors, Samuel reached out, gripping David's wrist. You did good, he said. Better than you know. David's throat tightened. Back in the heat haze, Michael stood silently, watching the ambulance vanish down the service road. He handed David a folder, Samuel's new contract, finalizing him as lead mentor for the driver training initiative. Beneath it was another offer, a full-time route position for David. David looked at it, then at the keys in his hand. The road wasn't just a job anymore. It was a legacy. He nodded. They both turned to look at the rusted Peterbilt. Faded paint, worn wheels, iron spine still intact. It wasn't the truck that made the driver. It was what he carried. David and Samuel's journey proves every rig hides a story, and every driver, a battle scar. If you were handed the keys to hard-won respect, would you take the wheel? Drop your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more road forged tales. See you in the next video.